Hey, Julia, how are you?
Hi, Karen. I'm fine. How are you doing?
I am good. It's Friday afternoon and it's all downhill from here, except for our session today. So,
I had somebody yesterday wish me Happy New Year, and it was like, it feels like Happy Old Year.
exactly, exactly. Um, well, it's delicious to be spending some time with you and also to be able to share what we're going to share with whoever's going to be watching this. So I'm going to dive in. So welcome to everyone who is watching. Julia and I spoke about what would be a great aspect of the ontological approach to offer you. And we thought that trust, which is such an important part of doing life, that would be useful to focus on. Sharing with you this notion of trust. And to start off with, perhaps you'd like to take a few moments and pause and ask yourself, what is trust? And you could even pause this video because I'm going to ask a follow-up question. What is it that we are doing when we say, I trust you? And what is it that we're doing when we say, I don't trust you? And what are the consequences of that? So those are questions to start to consider, because it's a word that we use pretty loosely. And in reality, what we do is we tend to say, I either trust you or I don't. And we make it categoric. And we never ever pause and step back and say, hang on a second, let's go to this thing of what is trust. And what we're offering you here today is an ontological approach to trust. And from our perspective, trust is an assessment. And what I mean by that, when we think about trust, we are making an assessment about someone's ability and capacity, and it can also be about the relationship. And what might be a more useful way to look at trust is, instead of saying, I categorically trust or don't trust you, is to start to break down trust into a variety of areas and to start to identify perhaps aspects where we do trust someone in certain areas and where we don't trust them, or trust is lower in certain areas. There are 4 elements in this interpretation, and there are many interpretations. You can think of the speed of trust. We're drawing from some of Fernando Flores's work in terms of building trust, and Robert Solomon's. So there are a variety of areas to draw from, but this is one interpretation that we found to be incredibly useful and is used extensively in helping people pay attention to their individual relationships, as well as looking at teams and how teams function in terms of high or low trust and where there's scope to build trust. Because I think one of the things is that we often think that when trust has been broken, it can't be rebuilt. And from this perspective, there are always possibilities for us to develop and build trust. So let's dive into these 4 elements. And we're going to offer you an exercise, but you'll see along the left-hand side, there are 4 elements that you can look at when assessing trust. And these 4 elements, if we start at the top, is sincerity. And by sincerity, one way of thinking about it is genuine. So when someone says something, their private conversation and their public conversation is aligned. They're genuine in what they're saying. And that can often be quite a felt sense. In terms of competence, that they have the skill and the ability to do what they say they will do. So for example, you wouldn't ask me to fly a plane because I don't have the competence to do that. And in certain instances, if you think about in family life, there's some people who you might ask to look after your children, and there's some people who you wouldn't ask because perhaps they don't have the competence or they are not reliable in terms of they're going to deliver on time according to what's your standard. So I used looking after children, but it applies to absolutely everything as well in terms of reliability. So that would be around time and standards. And then the last one is involvement. And this is the notion that your concerns are their concerns. What matters to you also matters to them. So they're not paying lip service. So you can see there's a relationship to sincerity, but this is really, I have your best interests at heart. So hopefully that gives you an overview and a framework for thinking about trust and what becomes possible when we break down trust in this way and look at these 4 elements is we can start to see where perhaps there's high trust or, yeah, this person really is sincere, and there's lower trust. Well, maybe I don't trust them in terms of competence, but I do trust them in terms of them being sincere. And we thought to make it really user-friendly for you is that you might like to even think about an important relationship, one that matters to you, and to use this framework to look at where the areas you do trust them and the areas where you don't trust them. And so I'll talk through the exercise, and then Julia, I will pause and give you an opportunity to come in and add. So thinking about this important relationship, what you can do is you can start to say, if you think on a scale of 0 to 10, how do you rate them in terms of sincerity? And then how do you rate them out of 10 in terms of level of competence with those definitions that I've offered? How would you rate them in terms of reliability? And then lastly, in terms of involvement. So that's you thinking about them, not having a conversation with them. And then now we're asking you to do a little bit of mental gymnastics, if you like, but imagine you are in their shoes and you're in their shoes looking at you. What do you think they might rate you on a scale of 0 to 10 in terms of sincerity, competence, reliability, and involvement? And pausing to do that. Then once you've done that, have a look at the ratings between the two of you. And of course, it's your imaginings, but this might start to give you some indication of if the relationship is important to you and you were to have a conversation, where you might want to start with the conversation. So how you might want to say to them, look, I really appreciate that you do have my best interests at heart. And when you say something, I believe that. However, in terms of the job that gets done, there's some misalignment. Can we talk about it? Because perhaps you don't see them as competent, and they see you as competent. So it's a way to start to have a look at where you could start a conversation. And I'm going to pause there and bring you in, Julia.
Yeah, so I think, Karen, a few thoughts from my side, and I might just emphasize what you've already shared, because I think you gave a wonderful explanation there, is that part of our approach in the ontological way is to use language with specificity and also responsibility. So when we're talking about trust as an assessment, it sits in the way we're using language. And of course, when we're talking about the notion of assessments, which trust is an assessment I'm making, it's inherently going to be subjective. And what happens with our assessments, particularly when we're talking about trust and relationships, and especially if there've been what we call relational breakdowns, then we tend to hold the assessments about another with a lot of emotional intensity. And some of those emotions can actually get in the way of building trust or repairing or recuperating trust. in the relationship. So that's something to bear in mind, is even when you're making this assessment for yourself and you're doing it deliberately using this exercises, to pay attention to what sort of moods and emotions might you be in about this. We did a video recently about moods and emotions, and that there's some moods and emotions that are going to detract from, let's call it, the continuum of high trust, and some that are going to support that. And equally, if certain moods and emotions are present, we may not be able to feel like we can shift along that continuum from low trust to high trust. So if we just refer back to the moods, the mood of resentment, for example, maybe mood of resignation, mood of anxiety could have a factor to play, because one of the things that you mentioned there, Karen, is when we can get specific about this in the context of the relationship. If I want to go and approach this person for a conversation, this, conversational action is like a fundamental possibility for us in the ontological approach. What moods and emotions am I going to need to be in, or going to serve that conversation to go well? So if I'm in resentment with a person, for example, I may be running a story that it's not, I'm not going to do it. I'm sort of on my high horse about that. If I'm in resignation, it's like I may have quit the possibility that anything is repairable here. And if I'm in anxiety, well, that can detract me from even approaching the person to have the conversation. And equally, if we look at the other moods, perhaps that could be more helpful in this, then there could be an avenue there to consider as well. So we really want to give you a sense that this is, although we're talking about trust and relationships, we're also talking about conversational actions that would help build, repair, or address certain things that are lacking in the relationship. And moods are always going to be a part of that too. If we look at trust as, I'd say, if we could look at it just for the fun of it as an emotion, then trust would have something to do emotionally with wanting or being willing to coordinate action with another. And the coordination of action, we may have mentioned this in one of our previous videos, is really important, because we're social beings. So we're constantly cooperating and coordinating with each other. And in organizational life, we're coordinating to coordinate. So and a lot of what we're doing, what's important here with trust in the kind of doing or the busyness of organizational life and family life, is linked to the process with which we gain commitments and execute on those commitments. Or another way of saying it is fulfilling the promises that we make to others. So trust often comes in when we're assessing or reviewing, how did that coordination with you go? Let's say we were tasked to do something, to deliver, and we had to collaborate and coordinate with each other. How did that go? And trust often comes into question when there have been issues or breakdowns in the flow of promise management. And that comes about because we often make requests of others to support us, and then we have expectations of how that will happen, and maybe something has gone wrong there, at least in our view, and then trust is something that would show itself. I don't know if you've got anything to add to that, Karen.
I love the way you've brought in about it being relational, and also it's about coordinating action. I'm going to coordinate action and stop share for a minute. I think that it also comes back to trusting ourselves, which you and I had a conversation about before. I think it was last week. And there's a word that's coming up for me, which is basic trust. And that is trusting ourselves. So part of it is ontological security. How safe and secure do we feel within ourselves, and have a sense that we'll be able to cope with what's life is going to throw at us, because life does throw curveballs. So that's, I think, a key part. And then I suppose it's about basic trust in the world at large, that although again, things are not going to necessarily go smoothly, that through relationships and through the way that we've learned to be in the world, we'll actually be able to navigate through it. And I think that it's part of what I love about this work is that, so we can talk about trust in quite a pragmatic way, and we can then also look at it from an existential way and what it means.
Yeah, I love what you've said there about that sort of existential way, because for me, and again, this has echoes in the mood of ambition, but part of that, I think, basic trust or navigating life. So not talking so much about relationships, but let's say my relationship with life or yours with the process of life or living, is this idea of deep faith. So I would say that's trust on steroids. The idea that that everything is happening as it is. So there's a sense of deep acceptance of what is going on right now and the stuff that we don't control and we haven't maybe anticipated, but also that we have this deep faith that I am okay and it will be okay, whatever it is.
Yeah.
You know? And I think to live life that way, I think just opens up many more possibilities than living in a sort of sense of existential dread or anxiety.
Yeah.
You know, and that could be like a fundamental choice of I choose to live this way. You know, and I think that contributes a lot to the quality of existence for all of us, which is at a very basic human level. It also gets me thinking, Karen, a lot of the time there are certain phrases that we become accustomed to using, like trust is earned or trust is built over time. And whilst I agree, you know, trust is built over time in relationships, etc., that I do wonder, there's always a sense of risk or vulnerability in deciding to trust. But I'm starting to think trust is a decision we make. Much as what we say it's an assessment, maybe it's a decision we make based on our assessments. So I choose to trust you. I choose to give you the benefit of the doubt. And where there isn't, I will take conversational action with you to continue to, and that's in the spirit of building the relationship. You know, so often I think that trust is earned or whatever. It's like, well, in a way, there's a sort of basic acceptance that if I'm in a relationship with you or anybody else, there's the risk of being hurt, being let down. And will I let that stop me from being in relationship and being a sort of a hermit or a loner or not? I don't know about you, Karen, but I'd prefer not. I'd prefer to be in relationship. I'd prefer to risk being hurt or let down for the sake of being supported and being able to coordinate and collaborate, because it just feels better.
I agree with you, and we haven't spoken about this, so we can always edit it out, you know. So, but you and I have had trust breakdowns in the past, and what I've so enjoyed about our relationship and us working together, Julia, is that trust broke down, and we have over time rebuilt it because of decisions we've made and the choices we've made. And I do think it's a testament to this work and to both of us in terms of saying this is possible. Never is a long time to, so we can either keep breaking trust, or we can pause, reflect, and rebuild trust. And
that it's just, that always reminds me of, you know, Alan Sealer's Voices in My Head, where he says, you know, mastery in life is mastery in dealing with breakdowns. And I too, Karen, very appreciative of the way we've actually chosen to show up with each other. You know, and the willingness to leave, let bygones be bygones and make a fresh start. And I think that's the choice we all have. It's, you know, it's up to all of us. I wanted to maybe highlight something, and you did mention it earlier, but that trust is often domain specific. particularly when we're talking about competence and reliability, and maybe even involvement, you know, is that it's, when I say domain specific, I mean, it's a particular domain of human action. And you mentioned it. It's like, Karen, I would trust you to deliver an ontological program. I would trust you to coach me. I would trust referring you to others because I know I rate you highly as a coach. But would I trust you to fly me to Timbuktu? No. Would I trust you to do heart surgery on me? Sorry, Karen, no, I'm going to go to a heart surgeon or a qualified pilot. So I think that's also another thing to bear in mind. And I also want to say that if we look at that exercise, one of the things that has often stood out for me in doing that exercise is like feeling like there's a trust breakdown with somebody, and I run the little exercise and I realize actually not all is lost, because maybe it's only one component that I'd like to address. If I don't address it, could I live with it that way? Yeah, I could make adjustments. Or if I do address it, what's, you know, what's the upside? What's the potential?
Yeah, and a wonderful conversation.
Yeah.
So hopefully we've planted some seeds for people and they have something to go away with. And we'd also love to be in touch with people. So I'm going to move on and put up the details, our details in terms of how you can get hold of us. And you might want to take a screenshot, give you a moment. The global offerings. So here I have not been very good. Hold on a second. In the moment, adjustment. Now, if you trust me sufficiently, you might like to take a screenshot because it is correct. So for global offerings, that's the Australian website. For the South African offerings, there's a website, and Julia and my details. And then for the European offerings, I'm involved in that, and Jeremy and Annabelle's details. So we'd love to hear from you. And we're going to keep sharing these ontological concepts with you in the hope that you get something out of it, so you get great value from it. And also, so we build a relationship with you.
And we'd love to hear from you.